wondering if it's working. I'm not able to make calls.
Morning.
Hey, good morning.
Morning. sympathy.
I'm presenting today, so I'm going to let everybody come up. I'm Derek Mitchell. Nice to meet you, Kevin. Yeah. Okay.
And I have sign-in sheets here. Okay. You can pass it. Yeah.
So, you know, I still can't hear it.
Oh.
I'm on the board at THC. And we brought a new president in, Austin Lane. No problem. I said, go call Lynn, Opal, work with y'all, because I forgot what's her name was here, Tracy. So I was the underwriter. The brakes was, I was telling you that's good. You care about it. They're just the same time. They still have this hard fabric. And they had somebody go and find a lot of what I'm going to call small pieces of the economy that most people need to throw out. Like us. And I think those pretty funny. They say here, $1 million, is that right? And it's over a 2-year period. It's not very much. Whatever it is, it's not in the big scheme of things. It's not very much, but when we add it up to yeah. So let's just hope it's whole economy continues war. You guys are big. With interest rate hikes. So everybody tell me about some developers, they say that houses that are below $500,000 are still strong. That's above. That's beautiful. Yeah. Passport being in Joe. Yeah. Election is fast. Yeah. What's the schedule?
Very
display council members, and a billion.
They figured out what high school was.
What do you realize?
No, we,
The man I remember what elementary commission did. She was like, "You're seven, like, you can fight." So. Other than that, I can what else?
we have new elementary school.
Okay. Numbers are good, test scores. Oh, no. I know, right?
Like it's 20 degrees out.
Doesn't that I'll have a little.
You had it on this morning, didn't you?
I do that.
That's what to me, we went to school.
I left that in the truck.
How's the thing you do?
He's good. You know, I went to show myself.
You're doing this right past me. Yes, I did.
I know, we'll just leave it now, so it's all.
It's
So they had it.
like 30 seconds. An hour and a half.
Yeah. Yep. Well, you get it like this.
I know. First one I always get right after that. It's like it happened. Yeah, I'm like, They don't tell them. They never understand. Yeah.
I didn't know that was you. How are you? Good to see you. Tell everybody to say hello.
Texas. Oh. Did I say A&T in there? No.
We'll just see what happens next week.
Do it.
I did. She sent together people. You can answer a lot of questions. She's been there, she was there when, Lori.
Well, we just say, all right, good morning. We're gonna go ahead and get started. We're still making a few more copies, and then I actually printed two presentations that Derek sent me, so he may not cover them, but there's copies of on the side from also related items that deal with bonds. So while he may not cover it, it's only one hour, there may be other things that you know, take a look at that. We have 4 presentations. We have a couple of races between, and then we'll have lunch somewhere around 11-ish, maybe 12, somewhere around the time. We're going to be here at that time. So, but we also have the PowerPoint on Nearpod. Has Daisy given you the code yet? Not yet? Okay, so I'll give you the code in case you want to look at it electronically and just move to the slides electronically as well. So, but you have a copy of the presentation all right. We apologize for not being in the 5th floor. There was a conflict, and there was a much larger audience that was going to use that, so we went ahead and traded off with them for today. And next month they'll be back upstairs. We just sometimes we make accommodations for divisions that have a much larger group, so we'll do that for next time. Our first presenter is Derek Mitchell. He's a partner with Bracewell, and I was teasing him. I said, okay, Bracewell and there's no end, it's just Bracewell, because you know they've changed structures over the years. But I teased him to say maybe you should say Bracewell and Mitchell, right? So please tell me welcome, Derek Mitchell.
This mic seems so formal, so. Is that okay? Okay. All right, so I think, Jesus, you want me to start with this one and then I go back to the 101 first? Okay. So I thought, I talked to Jesus earlier a couple months ago about presenting for everyone here, and I didn't have a list, but it's good to see some of my current clients and former clients, so welcome again, good to see you. Today I figured we'd talk a little bit about bond elections. I know Corby and Hcde just passed one, so I'm a little late on this one, but I think we talked to y'all, I'm sure, about it in the past. And I know Galena Park had one a couple of years ago, and so this will be a refresher for you. And then we're gonna gonna go backwards. I was gonna start a little bit. I know a lot of you are, clearly everybody's in finance, but some are CFOs and then treasurer in the treasury department. So we're gonna talk about bonds first, and then I'm gonna backpedal and tell you what public finance, I'm just gonna give you a quick 5 minutes on public finance 101 in terms of who we are as lawyers and bankers and what roles we all play. So it'll be quick and dirty on that. Let's get started. So this is Texas law, and I apologize, but I'm going to read the first part just because this is the first that's most important. It's an officer or employee of a political subdivision may not spend or authorize spending public funds for political advertising. And the two, public funds and political advertising, is the most important part here. Violation of this portion of the election code is a Class A misdemeanor. What that means is nobody's going to jail, but there's typically a fine related to that, and then of course, you know, you're going to be in the paper, and that could affect, you know, your job related. At the end of the day, I think the takeaway here, and I'll say it again later, is that you don't want to use public funds, or you're not supposed to use public funds for a political purpose. And that's what, in this case, advocating for a bond election. What counts as political advertising? Communications that when you are advocating for a particular issue. So, for instance, the question is the communication supporting or opposing a ballot item? So either one. If you are supporting, you're out and you're sending documents out in support of the ballot initiative, that's a communication that's advocating. And then even one that says, hey, don't spend our tax dollars unwisely. We shouldn't be building new school buildings or stadiums. That's opposing. That is still considered political advertising. In addition, it could be written, spoken, or broadcast. So paper, if you're on the radio during the day, during the morning, on Sundays, that's one. Social media, we've seen, has gotten a lot of folks in trouble because you can still be your own Facebook account that you could be using for that purpose, especially if it's in connection with the school district. Now let's get to what counts as spending public funds. Spending public funds is more than just spending district money. You got to remember that employees are paid with public funds. So an employee's use of time is actually also considered spending public funds. Sure.
So this only applies after the election has been called by the board, correct?
Yes.
Prior to the election, we can talk all we like.
You can talk, we'll get into that a little bit. You can talk all you like about it, but it needs to be factual, okay? Now, no, the answer is you still can't advocate using political dollars, period, okay, before or after. Because typically what happens is, typically what happens is the board or the superintendent will appoint a political action committee or a community group. And they will, it's an advisory committee, and they will say, okay, we need you to go and look at the school district and look for all of our needs, right? And typically what that is that group, your local pastors and local folks, and your facilities director will sit down and talk, and those are all what I call factual. There'll be a lot of factual information. The water heater in this school needs to be, we need to replace that. We need new school buses. But still, if you are advocating again for bond election, then you're using public funds. That's a good question. So again, so district employees, and this is important, the whole includes fax machines, copiers, printers,
and the like. So it's any resource. I mean, just the fact that you're working, we always tell people the rule of thumb, if you're at school, it probably counts. So, you know, the lights are on, and you're using the lights while you're doing something for the district. Even if you're using your own laptop, you're still here breathing the air using the AC. So it's better if you decide to advocate or oppose to do it off campus.
Are we doing, using the district funds?
Phones. District phones, exactly, yeah.
Mobile.
Yeah, if you use your own mobile phone, fine, and if you're being reimbursed by the district, that's fine, because it's still your personal phone, and they're reimbursing you. But if you're at school, more than likely you're using quote-unquote public funds. What can I say about a bond election? Employees and officers of the district may spend public funds on communications that are factual. So that goes back to what I was saying before. We need new buses. We need certain things. We need IT. We advise, I always, before a bond election, I typically meet with the board, the superintendent, and who are the other key employees, and I walk them through this presentation in terms of what they can do. Because even though we don't want them to advocate for something, typically, if you explain to the general public the need of the district, they get it. And if you have been good stewards of the public funds in the past, then you're more likely to make sure that the bond election passes. So again, you know, the tax rate implications, that's going to always be important to most people public. So you can talk about whether or not the tax base or the tax rate is going to go up as a result of bond passage. Again, factual communications must be true. So, you know, don't BS, if you will, when it comes to what you're trying to get. What are some of the things you can't say? Voting yes means better schools. Show us that you care about this district. Our future depends on it. Again, all those words that seem to be, again, advocating for the school district itself. Again, if you're at the district, you're probably spending public funds. This is a good example. In 2001, a middle school secretary and teacher created a political flyer, and they placed it in the internal mail system. They typed the flyer, and they reimbursed the district for the pages that they printed. But the Ethics Commission still found that they had spent public funds, although it was promoting. So that would be use of public funds. So I'll give an example. If you have a friend, in this case, it was I don't think it wasn't a bond election. It was a candidate. So if you send a link from your school account, if you will, to your colleagues or whomever using your personal account, just the link, you forward, just the forward, and I'll. In that case. Any advocacy is too much. 2001, the president of a community college used district resources for a newsletter. The top of the newsletter seeks voter approval. Again, they thought it was being factual, but the mere fact that they said, you know, we're seeking voter approval was a problem for that. Before your board on what is needed for the school district. And they've asked you questions, again, factual questions. It's okay for you to report on those types of things. Most of your school districts broadcast now over either the internet or just on TV. It's okay for you to talk about whatever the needs are. A lot of times, a lot of you, this is all, it's one of those, it's whatever the Texas Ethics Commission believes to be advocacy. And so what typically happens is you'll have, let's just say, I hope most of you would be in favor of a bond initiative, but typically you'll have politics will rear its ugly head, if you will, and you'll have a board member or some constituency that's against it. And they will use all the information they've heard, they'll record you in public, and they'll use that, they'll send that to the Texas Ethics Commission, and that's when the determination is made whether or not you violated the law. here's where you can, well, it says where you can advocate. District officers, employees may campaign for the, or even board members who would like to go out and advocate, to allow me to see the presentation or let me help them put the presentation together, just so we can make sure that it's more on a factual basis as opposed to an advocacy approach. Now, during the actual campaign, if you will, this is important. And you ask who can actually advocate whenever they'd like to. The Political Action Committee has been the best tool. In most districts, most of your districts, your vendors, I'm sure, I think Fort Benning had, I'm sure there's a name for it, you know, Citizens for Fort Benning ISD. And it will be a lot of vendors, your architects, your engineers, your lawyers, who, you know, quite frankly, will fund the Political Action Committee. And just to state the obvious, but the actual information has to be factual, and the district has to stick to that. It's called a contract with the voters. So I'm giving an example. If you provide information and you say, we're going to issue $100 million worth of debt, and we're going to build four high schools, we're going to do some IT, and 3 elementaries with that $100 million, guess what? You can't use the money for buses. We had that issue with Hcde, unfortunately. That's been almost 10 years ago, where the information was too particular, and they had some extra funds left over. And unfortunately, we couldn't use the money for buses, or for IT, or things that were not included in the bond election. So, initiatives, when we feel like the public may not necessarily appreciate building a stadium or using the funds for an administration building. And so, again, you have to kind of know the politics around your district, but either way, whatever you say when you're passing out flyers and when the PAC or whomever is describing what the money's going to be used for, it's got to be exact. And so this is where I think you come in as gatekeepers to make sure that you understand when it's time to spend the money, that you go back to that list and you say, hey, I'm going to sign off on this, but it's because it's part of what we talked about in the bond election. I get a lot of calls from CFOs to say, can we just talk a little bit about what we said again, how we can use the money? And FYI, if you don't use the money for, or if you, okay. And the next one's going to be just Public Finance 101.
I need to download it.
Okay. And if you have it in front of you, did y'all give them a copy? Yeah, hey, don't worry about it. I'll go through it. It's pretty quick. Yeah. So what I wanted to do is I always like to explain exactly what we do. You know, in the bond world, I money to the school. I have a lot more words, but that's at the end of the day what it is. And it's on a tax exempt basis, which means you get the debt at a cheaper rate. Typically, municipal bonds are outstanding for 1 to 4 years. Most of your districts are going to do it for some kind of way. You probably own it because it's a very secure investment. I think it's less than 1% default rate around the country. And so typically when you are about to get ready to retire, you want to shove as much to that side because you're going to lose. So no matter what the swings are in the market, you're pretty safe that you're not going to lose the principal on bonds. And then the implementation side, they make sure that the underwriter, they keep them honest, make sure that they're not gouging you on the brokerage fees. Then the lawyers, good guys and girls. Bond counsel is who you typically deal with. The bond counsel represents the district. And we always say we represent the district and the deal itself. We interface with the Attorney General's office. We draft these when you get cheaper debt. At the end of the day, if it was taxable, then they would want a higher rate because whatever the tax basis is, that's the delta. Then there's disclosure council. A lot of you, some of your districts use disclosure council, some of you don't. After 2014, disclosure council became a lot more relevant. Disclosure council, thousands of dollars for it. It wasn't a slap on the wrist that the Texas Ethics Commission did. In this case, these were folks that were being fired. Nobody got jail time, but unless there was fraud involved. But the idea is your disclosure council represents the district. They draft the official statement, and they're in charge of making sure all the information that is provided to them is correct. Okay. You ask, well, what do we? You never meet. You hear their voices on the phone, and that's because typically they always represent the underwriter, first of all. They draft the bond purchase agreement that you review and sign, and you hear them on the due diligence call. They call it, nobody really wants to have, but it's very important. And so that's what the Underwriters Council does. What's the timing of the transaction? Typically a 90-day transaction. I like to meet with my clients earlier with the financial advisor to make sure I understand the goal. And that is, when does the money hit the account, right? When do we need to use the funds? And then with the financial advisor, we will work with them on the timing to pretty much backtrack. I have 50 clients, that do this type of work. 40 of them, the general counsel didn't get involved very much at all. They're busy working on other special ed and other issues that are happening inside the school district where you're financial, they don't understand it, so they're going to lean more on you to select counsel. Underwriters Council is very interesting on that. You can't call me and hire me, but you can make sure that it's important that the team stays the same, like working with that firm. On the fee side, and this is, I did it for lawyers because the bankers are a little different. But for the lawyers, the good news is we work on a flat fee basis. This is one of those that's how we get paid. And then, other than that, that's the end of that presentation. Jesus?
On the disclosure council, can the bond council be the same as the disclosure council?
They can. Typically, the answer is yes. Bond counsel can also serve as disclosure counsel. They have to, in that case, they would provide 2 separate opinions. And so bond counsel again is bond counsel is gonna provide 2 opinions. One is that the documents, professionals, financial advisors, lawyers, architects, and accountants can all be just selected. You do not have to go through an RFP process. A lot of my clients do what's called an RFI, and they will send information to firms and say, or put it on the district website, either way, and say, we're having an RFI. It's a request for information. That is, you send us information about your firm. Any other questions?
So when I think of disclosure council, I kind of think about the continuing disclosure after the fact. Does disclosure council help with that as well?
Typically not. So they confirm that you have met your continuing disclosure. What happened, the breach, if you will, in the most honest way, but at the same time, and it's typically, look, this happened. The district failed to disclose that there was a downgrade in rating. There was. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for allowing me to come and present. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Let's take about a 8-minute break and then come back and we'll switch speakers.
Well, I asked him.
It's a good place.
I asked him what it
Wow.
I live about the same.
Right, but then when I that's not part of it. But I tried to show them this.
Talking about it. We'll be in December. I don't know how fast we actually can. I don't know.
Yeah, my sister works here. I sure will. You want, him to see that burden.
I'm like, you could have said that to him. She says the same thing in different ways. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you said it.
Well, I found that out. She can help me out with all of the reclassifications. I did all of that.
I'll see y'all later.
All right, see you again.
Mirrors is the way.
Oh,
To it. Supposed to be.
yes, no, oh, I need a cup. No, she did.
Say then.
I wish I could do that for you. Matches your shirt and everything, you're perfect.
Get it on phone.
I buy everything for it, I can find out that.
I thought you
Yeah.
When,
We went up there last September, my son got it. Tonight. We decided to not be a part of that, we're gonna let the kids just handle it.
That was the one, when we did ours, you know, as a water, that's the one where, she and her other roommates.
Oh, that was one. We took him to the chicken and we put him in the corner.
It's too.
It was a big deal, they didn't want to see it.
This is snow cone
And
nice,
he just
right?
poured it to him, so technically Doug did with that. He just didn't. He'll do it his way tonight.
Okay. You have the, oh,
took it off.
he took it out.
He's gonna put it back.
Okay. All right. Hello?
No, okay. I don't think I need to.
All right. So, continue with our next session. You have a handout. We're also going to provide it to you electronically. And want to welcome Michael Gonzalez from Hcde, and he's going to talk to us about SHARP program compliance, Medicare finance consulting. And so there's quite a number of clients that we have throughout the state. We have not utilized that service. It is a wonderful opportunity to bring in revenue for the school district. But there's also a caveat because these are federal funds, right? So anytime that you get federal funds, it comes with a added responsibility of, you have to meet those federal requirements, and all of a sudden now, if something goes wrong, you don't get to local jail, you get to federal jail, because it's federal dollars. So you're going to tell us how to make sure that we stay within compliance, and all about the SHARs and the MAC program. So please help me welcome Michael Gonzalez.
Thank you.
And you would start first?
Yeah, before he starts, how y'all doing? I gave each one of y'all the little sign-in thing, so I'm gonna collect them because we have a couple of door prizes at the end that we'll give out. Okay?
Oh, okay. That's a good news.
Okay, great. Thank you for having us here today. And I was going to kind of congratulate you here we go throughout the state. We're really fortunate in this area to have you coordinate so much stuff for us. Either a TASO affiliate or just finance, professionals in general. So we're really lucky to have Jesus in our area. So we really thank you for that. But anyway, we're going to talk about some things that everybody really doesn't like. You have to deal with auditors at different levels. But I was going to switch over to this real fast and then kind of work back through it. So we'll start with that one. So you'll see what's your applications, what's going on with audits and so forth. And so with the Medicaid program, a lot of times you'll just be dealing with SHARs or MAC or some of the districts have healthy staff, so early childhood prevention, EPSDC, so they might not only have SHARS and MAC, they might have other Medicaid programs that they do. Say, particularly about 42 different Medicaid programs, about maybe 60 different school districts. But the vast majority of SHARS are MAC. But anyway, it's always in conjunction with the special ed department, right? So as you're providing services to kids with special needs who receive related services, you know, they're going to be billable, maybe not to Medicaid. So you're just billing away and having a good time receiving all the money, whatever, then auditors show up and say, hey, you know, we're going to audit you. So this is where the audits occur from. If we look at the flow chart of who handles what, I think it'll make more sense. But like on the special ed department side, you deal with the U.S. Department of Education, and they have all these regulations that have to do with IDEA, and you know, IDEA has, you know, all the regulations that they post in the Federal Register, Code of Regulation. Their personal identifiable information is regulated in FERPA. So, you know, they might show up, and it might not even be the finance side, it's about FERPA. You know, what are you doing with, you know, the kids' data and how that works out. Then they have maintenance of effort. A lot of times districts will deal with maintenance of effort, and it actually, we'll get into the formulas a little. So you'll see, you know, we'll get a district say, why do we have to pay back 1.5 million? And if we're taking them on, we just went through a bad audit. And so, you know, they had to pay back. You know, it should be about gaining money, but, you know, the feds show up, they go through this audit, and now they have to pay that. So the non-subplat provision too of IDEA, so that can get you there. Then at the state level, it's TEA, and then that's the Texas Administrative Code. So SHARS is in the Texas Administrative Code. It's in there under HHSC, Health and Human Services Commission. And then the Texas Education Code. Then on the Medicaid side, they're the ones who, they're sending you those weekly checks. So let's say we're handling your billing, or another agency's handling your billing. We're sending them up to, you know, the state every week. You get your interim payments, but then you get, you know, audited either for the interim payments or, you know, your cost report. So at the federal level, it's U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and they publish all their stuff in the Federal Register, Federal Regulations, OOB 887, OOB A133, and they have HIPAA. So on U.S. Department of Ed side, they have FERPA. Well, HIPAA's a little bit different because on the HIPAA side, I'll give you an example of MD Anderson just had a violation a month or two ago, and their HIPAA violation was like $4.3 million. So it could happen to a school, but that's why we're trying to mitigate that so it won't happen to you. So HIPAA has financial ramifications to it. You get hit with a HIPAA violation, you know, they kind of give you a fine, a penalty, where FERPA doesn't necessarily. They give you a letter saying, yeah, you didn't meet that compliance. So they have the False Claims Administration Act too, which they enforce. You can't seek a federal payment or reward for Medicaid or Medicare, and if you didn't provide the service. So that's a provision that you have to be aware of as well. That could benefit you. And then you have the Office of Inspector General, so they can show up from HHS, and you know, they can actually, those guys usually come from Baltimore, and they're pretty fun guys to deal with. And then their federal agency is Center for Medicare and Medicaid, and so our CMS regional office is Region 6 in Dallas. So it handles the Medicaid, Medicare business for Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. And so whenever the feds send down things that we have to deal with, that CMS Region 6 office in Dallas is the one that sends it out to us. And we have to comply with it. They usually give you 60 days. It's like 60 days you have to comply with it. And then they deal with the state, Texas Health and Human Services Commission, and then they publish their stuff in Texas Administrative Code, Medicaid State Plan Amendments. So SHARS is in the State Plan Amendments for, you know, what we have to do. It has all the allocations. So everything that we have in our SHARS program it's in the state plan amendment that's approved by City Administration 6. So, and we'll talk about that in a minute, because Louisiana just did something that we kind of want to do. It's going to take us in here with that. And then their contractors for HHSC at the state level, the charge is TMHP, which is Texas Medicaid Healthcare Partnership. So we're transmitting claims to them every day. So about, what, 2 million is the volume that they have with all our client districts. So these are big districts, Brownsville, Albany, Pasadena, United IC, Hector County, and big County IC, Houston IC, the biggest in there. And so we're submitting them to THP, and they're sending district payments every week. Okay? And then Fairbanks, they handle not only the RMTS, but the MAC program, but they're also, that's where you're collecting the data for the SHARS cost report. So those are the two contractors. So you could have an audit from Fairbanks, which is TMHP, HHSC from the state level, TEA, U.S. Department of Ed, or HHS. So it's like, wow, that's a lot. Now, if you're signed up with us just to kind of play HHC, you know, we do that for you. So if you're ever notified that, hey, good luck, you're going to get audited, we defend your audit, we show up, and we do get out with these guys that they send down from the state or the feds. And we're pretty good. Roughing them up, right, Jackie?
Yeah.
So anyway, so we would defend your audit, and we kind of see where you're at. Hopefully, if your program, let's say, I think we had Arlington, that they had when they had come to us before, they had a different vendor or whatever, and they had some real problems with their audits and stuff, and payback and whatever. And then they were audited again by OIG. I think they had to pay back $24. And that's almost ridiculous, because that's pretty good. That's not bad, because it's usually bad. It's usually bad. So, but anyway, kind of that sets the tone for what we're going to talk about. So, you're driving down the highway, enjoying your day, and you get a call from the office and say, hey, we just got a letter. What does this mean? You're one of these guys. So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay. So just kind of go through that. Then we come back to the first slide. Back to program compliance. So the thing about SHARS and MAC is that you have to keep records, and where do you keep them? And special ed department might have a lot of them. A lot of times, they're kind of squeamish, and they always say finances, everything. So it's about asking questions. A lot of times, we'll work with the district, and nobody knows who has what, And so, if you're dealing with Jackie's group, they can get you lined up to who's owner and takes ownership of whatever records will be necessary to defend what type of audit. It could be that, at the state level, it could be that it's a typical RMTS problem. And so we're going to talk about RMTS because a lot of districts get in trouble with the random moment time study. What is that all about? And how does that work? But you have to certify every quarter your random moment time study. And so when you think about SHARS and MAC, random moment time study is necessary because the formulas that they have for ratios and so forth is determined by every district that participates in the random moment time study. That acuity level of time study tells us how much direct service are we doing, how much administrative services are we doing. Maybe we're at a budget meeting, so that's called administration stuff. If we're doing a direct service, you're getting paid in the SHARS program, so it develops your direct medical percentage, and we'll see that in the formulas in a minute. So these time studies are utilized to determine how you're going to allocate costs pursuant to ODA 87. So are they pretty important? Yeah. So if your district personnel, so who's part of this time study? Not the finance guys, not the accountants, the CFO, or people that work in the finance office. It's your special ed staff that are going to provide these related services. So it's your nurse, your psychologist, it's your personal care providers, whoever is actually providing a available service that's going to the SHARS program. But there's also the MAC program. So they're going to be part of our MTF and include all the SHARS clinicians that are available should be in that random moment time study. So the point about random moment time study, you can't claim for anyone in Charlotte that they're not in your time study. So every 40 you have your participant list, and you have to certify, what let's say you have 50 nurses, we have 40, 51 nurses there. Let's say there's about almost 300 speech therapists, personal care providers, 900 maybe in Houston. So it's a lot of people that you identify that provide the services. But if you don't put them in RMTS and the participant list, you can't bill for them every week as they're providing services day in, day out. But you can't also put them on the cost report. So that's sort of like the gatekeeper of what you start off with. So a lot of times districts will be billing on, let's say I'm a nurse somewhere, but not even a time study. So that's the first thing you find out. So you want to make sure that anyone you bill on, anyone that's sold on a service ticket, whether it's a paper ticket with your vendor, we're electronic, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So all of them have to be on that random moment time study. They must participate in the time study effort because their effort collectively throughout the state, everybody's in that time study during the same period of time. Dallas is on it, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, everybody's on it. And they're developing, percentages that will, let's say you start out with, like Houston, we might have about 150 million in cost on a cost report. By the time you get through all the ratios, they're discounting costs based on this random moment time study, information that's coming back. Then some ratios that come from your district as well. So random moment time study is really important. People don't really take it as seriously as they should because they just figure it's a list, how many nurses you have, whatever. The main thing is get with the budgeting department and HR, determine, who's there, if they're in counted this year, Jackie. But let's say it's 60%, we'll round it up to 60%. So for every, let's say $100 you bill, you're getting $60 federal, you're certifying the state match. The feds envision that you're matching your own costs on behalf of the state. So they look at it as a total computable expenditure that you're getting 100%, even though in reality you're not. You're getting just a federal drawdown, but you have to certify the state match. So when you get your cost report, and like the district that, let's say that district that we were talking about earlier, that says, we had to pay 1.5 back. You didn't have enough state and local to match for that federal drawdown. So, there's a threshold that you have to watch. And so when you're looking at these salaries, so the less that you're having to back out, station side, buses are just appreciate everybody. So you only have an hour. So, let's April 1st. Okay, so we're going to 6 months for cost report reconciliation, 20 charges, and that's, in this particular case, 2,500. I don't know how many routes, and they take an AM and PM out. That with your direct costs is the cost of salaries and benefits, and your height and stuff. So you're going to have full transparency, full disclosure. So don't back out the federal. Don't include them. It's not. You would have hardly anything backed out in federal. So when you get to that point, what do you have a good number there?
Yeah, how picky are you think the auditors are? Lots of these people do extra jobs, get stipends and supplements and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And parts of that might be federal, parts not. How picky are auditors when it comes to?
Pretty picky. Pretty picky. Well, it's just like when the district says, okay, could you look at it in my MOE? So, how much, of non-supplant should I be at, right? So, auditor, like, when I was an auditor, I was a strict constructionist auditor. So it's like 100%. But Jackie might catch you some slack and say, 95%. But, it just depends on, the auditor, right? It's like the old Barney fight, right? If Barney fights stopping you at the red light, you give you a ticket, right? But if it's not, if it's what Andy Griffith, he'll let you go. Yeah, drive better next time. It's kind of like that with auditors, So, try to look at a report that says, here's Michael, he's the nurse, 70% of, his cost. So here's my total cost. Let's say here, let's say it's, whatever the number is. You have a column for state and local, and then the federal. So you'll show them that here's the total, but here's, the state would go, the total is the direct, they would back out the federal part. Because, you're gonna get to the point where they will pick, like, let's say you have 800 providers, they might pick 100, and it's the 100 that you have a problem with. Not the ones that are 100% state and local, or 100% federal. It's always those ones. Mary was 50-50 or 60-40, and, you did back out that cost. So it looked like Mary was 100% state and local, okay? So they are picky, it just depends. Like, Jackie handles a bunch of picky, tough ones, right? So, but anyway, so the federal part, so the compliance side is this. So they want to see ledgers. They want to see what's in your general ledger. They want to see, here's your payroll costs, right? So it's always good to have like a list of all of your employees by specialty. So like nursing, you have a section for nursing, you have a section for speech, a section for personal care, and then break out their costs if they're like. And then remember we talked about random on the time study. So you're going to the time study, all the nurses, speech therapists, all of them are given a random moment. Not all of them might be selected, but as they do respond, the state develops this, direct medical percentage, and I don't know what the average is this time. I should put 54%. What is it now? Is it 47%? So the state is saying that based on their time study effort, 47% of the time, your nurse, your speech therapist, whoever's providing the short service is providing the direct service. So you take that percentage. So let's say that you started out with, 10 million there, you back up 2 million of federal, now you're down to 8. Now you got 54%, so you're down now to less than 4 million, right, of cost. When you get your total cost, and so that's where you're at with your total net. And that's where your IP ratio comes in. So we talked about that earlier. Remember, Medicaid's only obligated to deal with the kids that are Medicaid eligible. They don't pay for all of your kids that are receiving shower services. So right here, when they get to that net cost, then your IP ratio kicks in. And so, let's say the scenario we had earlier was like 50%. So, here's the scenario we started out with 10, backed out 2 for federal. You're down to 8. Let's say you added in another 100,000 for indirect costs, and then so you're up to about 4. You started out with 10, then added down to 4. Now you're down to with 50% IP ratio. You're down to 2 million. So you started out with 10. Now your allowable cost is only 2. So you see how that works. So what could help here is it used to be pretty high at one time. So you would think that 80% of the nurse's time is direct medical, right? Or speech therapist. I mean, that's what you hired it for. But they're saying less than 50% of the time they're doing a direct service. It doesn't make sense. So it could be maybe during time study effort, they need to respond, accurately, so that number could go up, and that would bring up your cost. Any questions on that one? Okay. And then next one would be transportation. So, cost report has 2 components. That part we just talked about with your medical. Transportation is the actual cost of your bus drivers, mechanics, gasoline, fuels, parts, maintenance, repair costs, vehicle insurance, interest, rentals, rental that you have, depreciation, 7 years depreciation. Some districts will say, well, we did over 10 years. Well, the feds and state don't care. You're going to make more for them, and it's 7 years. It's we get that call all the time, and that's what the state's going to tell you. So it's their program. We see that most of the time your mechanics and all the costs involved with special ed fleet is usually state and local, so they're usually pretty good. Scenario, you're putting in all your costs, and last step, so you take the Medicaid to direct costs for the charge of medical services, determine how to navigate costs, should it use more federally funded positions, state and local, whatever. Sometimes we'll get a district and it's like, they get all these positions from, right? Or, like the district that had a payback and said, why would we have to pay back 1.5? And so we're going to get into why that happened. This is kind of the, your board and saying, yeah, we gotta pay $200,000 back for, 1 year, they have the states for the, for any Medicaid eligible, Medicaid, so then that's enough. We're using it.
I'm sure it is. What the state is in January, they're going to be extending. So we're just waiting to anticipate that. Because then we can just figure out All right. We'll go, continue with our presentation and the code for Nearpod is FDUGE. FDUGE. So if you.
A few days ago, Representative Bonham called a press conference, and he came into the meeting looking like an ordinary legislator, and then he announced he had 109 votes to be Speaker of the House of Representatives. And he came about 12 feet tall, because we all recognize the power that exists in the Speaker. In the process, he announced, as others have announced, that the #1 legislative issue in the coming session of the legislature would be school food, talking about words like adequacy and equity and stability. The governor and the School Finance Commission and others involved have managed to create a system that have managed to propose a number of ideas, the sum total of which add up to neither adequacy or equity or stability in terms where we're going to be, but we hope we're going to make more progress as we go forward in the system. First thing we have is talking about revenues. The revenue estimate will be given by the controller to the legislature in the first week of the legislative session. And as you may be aware, it's a binding revenue estimate, meaning that the legislature really can't exceed what the controller says is available. So whatever Glenn Hager says is available in terms of revenue is what you're going to get. Theoretically, the legislature can overcome that by a 4/5 vote. The law's been in effect since 1949. Nobody's even talked about it. So basically what the controller says is what you're going to get. For those of you who have been involved in revenue estimating before, you know that if the situation is not stable and you have a significant change in your revenue patterns over time, you tend to get conservative because the last thing you want to do is put the district in debt in its general fund. And when you look at some of what I'm about to show you, I think you'll understand why we don't expect anything great out of the controller in terms of revenue estimate. The first is the sales tax growth by month over the past 45 months, coming up through September of 2018. And as you can see, we've got a lot of pluses and a lot of minuses. The two minuses out here in September of 18 are a little bit, they're not because something happened to sales, there's something happened to the tax structure. Because the voters, the legislature proposed and the voters authorized the legislature to give the highway department $5 billion to repair roads, which meant that we have a significant decrease in revenues for those 2 months, plus one more. The same way, if you look at growth over time in the revenue estimate, for the sales tax, which is most of our state revenue, the basic result is back a few years ago in 2016, we weren't growing. We had a stable basically a stable sales tax. Sales tax took off in 2017 and continued in 2018. Another example of a lack of stability in the system is what's been happening to the price of oil. Yesterday, the price of oil was $55.63 a barrel, which means that the growth, all of the growth that we've seen at the end of this chart has been pretty well wiped out, and we don't have a real stable base to move forward in terms of oil production taxes. And then finally, in terms of the production of oil in Texas, a pattern of more consistent growth there than we have expected with oil fracking and related subjects. We are still getting good growth out of the oil production tax. The problem with the oil production tax, though, is not so much, again, what the numbers have been, but rather what the legislature has done. Because 3/4 of the money from the oil production tax goes into the rainy day fund of the state, the economic stabilization fund, and can only be spent by a supermajority vote of 60% or better. in order to be spent on public education or other needs. With all that, the controller has told us that his estimate of how much money we'll end up with at the end of the legislative session, at the beginning of the legislative session, from surplus tax revenue is going to be $2.7 billion. Just to give you public school education in a 2-year period from all funds, state and local, spend some $100 billion plus. So we're not talking about a big surplus in terms of our overall revenues, but rather a fairly minor one. What we don't know yet is what the controller will forecast in terms of growth. But as I said, the likelihood is not terribly positive when you look at the instability of major revenue sources. Now, when state agencies go through their budget process, state agencies get to ask the legislature, most state agencies get to ask the legislature how much money is really needed for their area. So TRS Care, Medicaid, Health and Human Services, the Department of Transportation, major state agencies with major needs in terms of additional revenue. That we need, some $400 million plus to take care of TRS Care. It's not active care, that's the TRS Care retirement program. Some Medicaid, $2 billion shortfall for the current biennium, and another shortfall coming. Health and Human Services Commission, almost $3 billion of need for additional exceptional items. And even the Department of Transportation, which is the benefit of that sales tax transfer of $5 billion, wants yet another $1.3 billion in order to continue to keep the potholes plugged in our transportation system. By way of contrast, the Commissioner of Education, at least believing that he's under some direction to do this, although it's not a legal requirement, the Commissioner of Education has forecast a reduction in revenue need because of increased property values throughout the state of some $3.8 billion. So the other agencies are asking for more money, and the state is giving it back, and the education agency is giving it back, and making two massive requests. One for the Safe and Healthy Schools Initiative for $54 million for the biennium, and one for special education supports for $50 million.
Is that for both?
Pardon?
Okay.
Your choice at the moment. So, keeping that into account, realize that a lot of this revenue increase, this $8 billion, comes from increasing recapture throughout the state. As you know, many districts have been moving into the recapture arena before this biennium is out. Coming biennium is out. Dallas would join Houston and Austin as major recapture districts. And then there's a little wrinkle down in a footnote, kind of in the budget. It's not really in the budget at all, but it's a footnote to PEA's problems. They don't ask, the only additional money they ask for special ed, other than a little bit of enrollment growth, is $50 million that is in this exceptional item. However, TEA officials have said in public that if special education growth gets back to levels that it was in several years ago, where it was approaching 12% of enrollment as opposed to 8% of enrollment when the state was determined to be out of compliance by the federal government. If that money effectively has to be replaced, then we're talking about $1.5 billion a year of additional requirement that's not in the budget at the moment. So at least that's one place that $3.8 billion can be spent. But as we'll talk about in a little bit, there's lots of competition for how to spend that $3.8 billion savings up there in the first item. Now we have a school finance commission. Excuse me, let me get a little water. Sorry. We have a school finance commission that's been at work studying school finance over the past year. It's a 13-member commission that has various members, legislative, school administrators, State Board of Education member, and others. It was appointed by the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor under a law that was passed last session. It expires at the end of calendar year 2018, so the legislature, as is wont, creates this commission to provide experts in school, to make them experts in school finance, and then does away with the commission before the legislature shows up, which leads some questions to what the value of the recommendations will be. It has 3 working groups: the Outcomes Committee, the Expenditures Committee, and the Revenue Committee. Each of those working groups is expected to come forward with a plan. Outcomes and expenditures already have. The Revenue Working Group is having a little more trouble figuring out what it wants to do. In terms of some of the critical points that get talked about amongst this commission, the performance-based funding, property tax relief, a new structure for public school finance, and quality education programs in the state. So the Outcomes Committee has recommended a 3rd grade reading achievement program for $723 million based on a comp ed-like formula for combination of comp ed and bilingual formula for the K to 3. Then additional funding for $337 million for students, for districts that meet standards as far as educational performance. It's an 8th grade algebra assessment program, and the Outcomes Committee recommendations. They have not come up with a cost estimate for it at this point, but it does stand as another area in which there might be significant money involved in terms of recognition. A $400 million program for graduation for students who were qualified for college, career ready, or military readiness in terms of future, in terms of postgraduate performance that would lead to funding back to high schools. Some $400 million, very little detail as to how that is intended to be spent. $300 million for a new program for weights for teacher pay. This is performance-based pay, in which the Commissioner of Education is very interested in pushing forward a program to have a performance pay program similar to the program that is at Dallas ISD currently, and which the commissioner was involved in when he was a member of the Dallas School Board. It would also involve signing bonuses for new hires for advanced teacher prep programs, mentor coach role for high-performing teachers, and a district-created evaluation system under standards that are built by the education agency. Then they recommend eliminating outdated elements to fund new or expanded programs. And we'll come back to that in just a moment. They add funds, added funds for increased compensatory education program funding above and beyond the current compensatory allotment or the new allotments that they're sponsoring. They essentially want to double the comp ed allotment for public schools. Now, there's an expenditures working group. That was the outcomes working group we were looking at. They did a fairly dramatic job of identifying some elements of our current formula structure that would no longer be used, in which the cost would be surrendered back to the general fund for other programs. That includes eliminating the cost of education index, which would save $2.9 billion, eliminating the high school allotment, eliminating the gifted and talented allotment for $565 million or so, and increasing the basic allotment to provide replacement funding in general across the board on a statewide basis, but not as a specific hold harmless. Districts with high CEI funding, which includes a lot of the districts in Harris County, would lose funding from the CEI elimination, but would gain some funding back from these other programs we're talking about in the process. How that's, again, the details are very skimpy on how that will work as we go forward. The Expenditures Committee would also adjust allotments for dual language programs, for dyslexia, for career technology funding, and put additional state funding into a number of other areas, including changing the transportation formula, an old 1992-93 hold harmless that was in place for Chapter 41 districts. Small and mid-sized adjustments they're still working on, and increasing the NIFA appropriation for school equipment by action of the Finance and Appropriations Committees. They also recommended moving to current year property values. I won't take you through the arcane mathematics that will involve, but it would save the state $1.8 billion a year and provide them, along with that $2.9 billion for the cost of education index, a pretty fair pot of money to put into new programs and new ideas. And then they said that they would change Tier 2 equalization programs to increase funding for those, but haven't provided detail on that as far as the future role of the so-called golden pennies, or and the copper penny Tier 2 programs. So that's what the commission has done so far. It has about 6 weeks left of life, and they have a lot of issues that they haven't addressed yet in terms of the detail of how these programs would work. Whether they're going to cure that or not is frankly uncertain at this point. The second major area that the legislature will be talking about is property tax relief. Now, from my point of view, correctly or incorrectly, the problem the state has with property taxes is very simple. The state doesn't have an income tax. The state does not have a very high sales tax. The state does not have an income tax. Therefore, it relies on the third leg of the tax stool, almost exclusively the property tax. However, others have found other guilty parties for high levels of property tax, and we'll talk a little bit about how they would propose addressing this in this process. Governor Abbott, we need to pay our best teachers more, reward teachers and districts for student growth, prioritize spending in the classroom, and reduce the burden of skyrocketing property taxes. And I'll add up front, the state will have to provide more funding. The governor has said a number of times the state has to provide more funding. He's managed thus far not to provide a number that goes with that. And so there's a fairly wide range of possibilities at this point as to what more funding might mean. But he has proposed a program which is going to cost a very substantial amount of money. Now these slides in this section of the marks are the slides that the governor's office, or a portion of the slides the governor's office has used. They're not our slides in terms of the operation. On the other hand, they're certainly public, and so I don't see any barriers to sharing them with others in the process. The goals for the property tax reform: prevent the imminent collapse. We had skyrocketing revenues a moment ago. Now we've got an imminent collapse of public education funding. There's nothing that I know that is in the process of imminently collapsing at this point. They want to reduce recapture, keeping local tax dollars local. They kind of ignore the issue over the fact that there's a court decision that goes back to the 1980s that the state has to have an equalized revenue system, which is what recapture is fundamentally all about. So we haven't seen how that's reconciled with the governor's plan up to this point. Slow growth, promote housing affordability by capping annual property tax increases and bolstering economic development by lessening the burden on capital-intensive industries. What that translates into is a tax reduction for major corporations in the state. As we go through that. So they spend a little time on what would happen if they don't do anything to address school property taxes. And basically, not surprisingly, school property taxes would go up if we continue to grow in property value at the rates we have and don't cap tax rates that are presently in place. There's going to be more recapture and there's going to be reduction in the state share overall. Current law projections have the state falling to 32%. It's now about 40%. So the state share, they're saying will go down to 32% if we don't do something. Don't disagree with that estimate in general terms. Recapture would double its share of public education funding, and property taxes would finance 68% by 2023. Our guess is it's a little faster than that. Without property tax reform, recapture will also skyrocket. And, no particular argument on that effect. The problem with recapture is that the state has come to rely upon recapture to help fund not only public education, but to help fund other state expenditures as well. And that's a major problem in our revenue system. So if things continue at their current pace, the state share will fall. Here's another state share prediction. They get worse as the slides go on. The state share to fall 20% within the next 10 to 15 years. Now, there have been some past efforts at tax reduction. In 2006, there was a significant action passed by the legislature to reduce property taxes. It did have an impact, but it was not a permanent impact in the sense of holding property taxes down, which is what the governor would like to see. I'll leave out the unfair recapture system. So what does the state do under the governor's recommendations? Targeting additional state resources to data improvement strategies. So they're going to put money into improving educational outcomes through some of those programs we talked about earlier. Using state revenues to ease the overall reliance on school property taxes is a great line. The problem is they haven't provided an estimate of how much state revenue they're prepared to put in the system or where it's going to come from. So we're still waiting for that piece of information. Compressing property taxes overall is a significant element of their program, and one that I expect to see substantial work on in the legislative session. Additional state resources to look at student outcomes. This again picks up the information that we had earlier about the commission paying the best teachers more, focusing on additional resources on early childhood, rewarding districts, and providing equity of school finance formulas. Basically just graphic depictions of how their system would work. Balance the state share and to protect taxpayers, school district tax rates should decline as property values increase, which is fine. We understand that. The problem again is that has to be wrestled with is what is the source of revenue for those, because if you take into account, if you make school district tax rates go down as property value increases, you have no net new income available to schools through the foundation program. They proposed a 2.5% Tier 1 M&O revenue cap. I'll try to simplify that a little bit. Basically just that your revenues could not go up more than 2.5% is their basic objective per year, and all other revenue would have to go into property tax reduction. The 2.5% Tier 1 revenue cap provide a little detail on how it would actually work. For those of you who are particularly interested in looking at that, I'd like to talk to you after the session as well. Across the state, communities with rising property values will finally receive relief from a decade of rapidly increasing property tax bills. Again, what happens if we start reducing reliance on the property tax, where is the money for public education reform coming from in the future? So they're looking at a reduction of 1.87 billion in projected recapture by 2023. They don't give any total cost numbers in this report, but again, our fundamental question is you've got to look at the question of where that money's coming from in the future, especially if property tax values at some future point start to climb. They would also like to do a little more on recapture and thumb their nose at the courts and see what the courts do. Nobody really knows the answer to that question, but they're suggesting, in essence, to make the system inequitable and then to have it tested in court once again. Fixing the recapture process is necessary to ensure all districts benefit from the Finance Commission reform proposals. They're saying give money to the wealthy districts as well as to the poor districts. I remind you that the popcorn slides are the governor's popcorn slides, not no Casey's popcorn slides. They have quite a few in their total presentation. But they do have a new system for charter attendance credits, and we thought we'd never see them again. In another life, Jesus was one of the leading practitioners in the state at Laredo for dealing with dealing with attendance credits. Needs a couple of little amendments, but I think we could probably get them put in, get back in business on that. Okay. Basically, what charter attendance credits are is instead of paying charter payments, you would pay charter schools, and charter schools would get less state aid. So it doesn't start out as a net positive. In terms of the overall effects of property tax reform, we've been through that pretty well. The governor's 2.5% revenue cap. This is we're back in our slides now rather than those of the governor's office. Basically, it amounts to a revenue cap on year-to-year increases in revenue from properties that exist in both years. New properties would be exempted for a year. It's implemented as a cap on tax rates. It reduces the allowable tax rate, reduces the compressed rate without reducing formal funding, and increases the equalized wealth level. So this is just one sheet of, I won't go through them, but it's just one sheet of the many technical questions that exist and how this program is going to be put together. Up to this point, there is not information on that, on those technical details as to how this system will work, which has made it difficult, if not impossible, to model the program at this point in terms of computer simulations. Quick word on other funding issues beyond the foundation program. Hurricane Harvey funding remains a significant issue to be addressed by the legislature, hopefully early. What kind of tax abatement policy is going to flow from the governor's statements on economic development? The instructional materials funding allotment has had some controversy between the Commissioner of the General Land Office, Commissioner Bush, and the State Board of Education. We're going to have A through F campus ratings, presumably announced this summer. What effect will that have on the school finance system? There'll be a lot of discussion here this year on how school districts use money and whether they ought to be constrained from using money as they see fit, and forcing money, quote, into the classroom as a result. And the funding of PRS and PRS Care will remain a significant element in this upcoming session. In terms of some of the questions to be issued in broader policy context, salaries of teachers and other personnel have really not kept pace with inflation. And so I think salaries is likely to be a significant issue in the coming session of the legislature. Growth in property values translates into a need for tax compression as part of the solution, but not all of it, as has been proposed. And balancing the demands with politics in the legislature, back to that issue of the new speaker, will be the number one issue in the 2019 session. So with that, are there questions or concerns? I hope they're concerns. I don't know if they're questions. Right now, I don't see where the more money comes from. The biggest source of money available was that $3.8 billion that was that the commissioner underestimated or estimated for the effect on property values. But I think that's going to be well spoken for before they finish. And I see the possibility of more money, but I still think that they have to get around the fundamental corner of accepting the fact that schools need more money in the process.
Bills have already started to be found?
Yeah, there were 400 the first day, there were 87 the second day, and there were 23 the third day or something. We hope that trend continues in terms of decline. But yes, bills are being filed. We haven't seen anything considered significant school finance bill at this point.
So the speaker is going to be resolved by when?
It's been resolved.
It's been?
He has 109 votes, he only needs 75.
Oh.
It's bonded as the new speaker. He just had to take it off the ship.
So the committees or assignments will come out?
Probably by the second or third week in January. That may be an overestimate.
All right.
But thank you very much for the opportunity. Always glad to be here.
Let's take about a 10-minute break and then we'll come back and look at see the food is ready.
We have a long drive down. You can ask them anything.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Our underwriting, either our districts that is just for the last 2 years, and that's one side, but we keep building. And what I was just going to
The last sentence was true.
how much do we add to each day? Like the city pension problem was essentially $100 million a day we were getting for last day.
The first issue.
That's not.
Is that clear from your stuff?
You got
You presume they,
but it's unclear.
And property that's. Best funded at 2 billion underfunded. Well, I don't know.
What do you mean?
If you're gonna do it on current year value,
Yeah, I wouldn't.
you got to buy in. But property has to be in there, all new properties, obviously.
Hi.
How are you?
Good to meet you. Do you get tired of bringing really bad news?
I have a lot of.
I don't have to do that, yeah, that's why I.
School board, and they asked me a question. They almost always do. And the line is that, if it were good news, the superintendent would be here.
That's true. Yes, or the state legislature.
And I'd be sitting up there.
That's true. Or for that matter, more president.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, you'd have a line of people taking credit if it were good. Yeah. You know, just trying to follow what, presumptive speaker Bonner is going to do.
Definitely internal.
I mean, what's really funny is they opened a Twitter account the day of the press conference, but days later, his office confirmed they're not running. So it's somebody with a great sense of humor and a really good feel for the humor of the characters in the legislature. So I'm enjoying following it, but I now know that it's not out of Bonner's office. Like they tweeted a list of committee chairman assignments, and they just every single committee listed not stickling, not stickling, not stickling, not stickling, which was really funny. And they've tweeted some polls of like, what's important to you for us to work on, and with real issues, but also Stickling's beard. And so like, it's just been really funny to watch, but later Speaker, Brett Bonner was like, no, this really isn't us, I don't know how to work Twitter. So that was mildly disappointing. Yeah, he's going to be really good. He said he will tackle school finance reform, and everybody's like, what does that mean? Somebody who likes tax caps. Those of us who live in Houston under properties, like revenue caps, we would rather not. Those of us that feel like the potholes never get filled and the trash is only picked up on time 30% of the time, would rather than not cap. So it's hard to say. No.
Because some of the bills
I just felt like it was just an attack on local governments that are happy to flex power. And so Austin's like happy with its liberal bastion-ness. And so they seem to attack them more. But they're not, they weren't friendly to Houston either.
I noticed.
It's probably the bottom.
Last year, when the mayor was trying to pass the pension reform in the city, he was telling them how much the debt is growing daily. That $1 billion a day accumulates onto this debt that was at the time $8 billion underfunded. And so that was the pitch. So I just didn't know if we knew statewide how bad it is. Whether it's daily or monthly or annually, this much more, we fall in the hole, this much more.
TRS, we know that the healthcare program that take over is at risk. Not so much the primary.
Good. Oh, okay. Okay.
Somebody can't possibly have this many things running from here.
Exactly, no. As chief of staff, no.
9 months, so you can't do that.
And then there are some of us who have never felt, there's this generation that's never felt like any retirement system has ever been stable, so.
Well, I remember when I was you and I said, yeah, it'd be a while before you think about it. Let me start thinking about that.
No, we care, I care, I just don't trust anything that has great benefits, I know won't stay. Like, that's not real. That won't last. ERS is not as well funded, right? State employment, isn't that horrible? You're like, I don't want to.
Healthcare, Covers all state employees.
Yeah, she was trying to, so we did a real
Retirement, she was saying,
It's why, I mean, from a big picture perspective, it's why coming out of the local government was really interesting, because the state was so involved in our local issues at the city level, that they had not really implemented. And so, it's really interesting for me to watch different systems controlled by different people, how, and again, it's a giant piece of it, but so some kind of a map.
this organization.
yeah, there's a great thing.
I mean, we hear more than rumblings, but post-election, no, everything's worldwide. Yeah, shockingly, it's still looking good. Yeah, I mean, I think our husband on the months ago saying that he will file every business file. Last session, on the sunset, wanted to just abolish county boards for making. So, back in like July, that exists.
It's just that when I did that, it was
Oh, Harris County swung the rule, so we are the only entity in Harris County still controlled by Republicans. I was and you have also, there's just, like, there won't be support on this side. He can have the state wrong. There won't be city well, I'm hoping that because of the election results, he has because he doesn't have any, he's not going to have state, he's not going to have city or county support for any of the super conservative things he wants to do. So it's like, if he's trying to accomplish other things and shut us down just for this fund, side gigs, then I believe he's going to have to work a whole lot harder to do anything. Right.
how about 9:30?
Yeah, so, yeah, I get a little more than I think, but they tap into the money as well, when they start talking about all taxing. Then they may realize, oh, this is a unicorn that has to be involved in the conversation. Otherwise, sometimes I don't get anything. Have bigger ideas on there. There may not be enough. Everything around it.
Okay, thank you.
Harris County.
Is that the community services accounting code that we're referring to? What do we call it? Like what category includes where?
She said she gets ready to make something.
Okay. Well, I just there's enough we need, so the hard part is each one of these unicorns does special, like they specialize in their own stuff, but like I can't imagine coming out of a special ed sort of entity in this year where special ed is out. Oh yeah, also, please go find all the students that you missed and find what the circuit do it. Right, it's like, so I can't imagine them doing more detailed less. So, those are, so strategically, that's where it falls. We don't need to close it down.
Yeah.
Well, and we've got four Harris County, it's over 50%. So you're not gonna just handle it. We have 16 Head Starts in our center. But I just, yeah. But every now and again, so let it go. That's so.
Okay. What I think, Jackie and everybody to, that, set up this, that was great, so, please, come and get, your food and then, we started on the truck.
Whatever you did. Supporting.
Live streaming.
What were you going to say? All the time. We were talking about how logic will not always rule the day. I know. You've been there for a lot longer. When I started, good lunch. They're really good because they don't go from which is good. It's also been there once. No, I mean, but yeah, I'm gonna do that.
Sometimes we open it up.
Right, that's the one I've been to once before. Actually, from my husband, I was like, easier to travel. It's very
Yeah, we had a show.
It's cold in here.
Yeah, a little bit. Nobody's watching. I can see only one, which is me, because so at the end, then you kind of know what I'm doing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, y'all.
Exactly, yeah.
I was about to do that.
No.
Yeah, you know, at the farming, yes, you are.
Lots of.
Yeah, they're still with us. Yeah. I didn't know she had that. I know she had All right, we're gonna go ahead and continue. I know that there's lots of food, so help yourself to grab seconds or whatever's there. There's a lot of food and I don't wanna eat it all. So, our final presenter is Gordon here, please, with Amir Consulting. He's worked many years in IT and now he's doing consulting on E-rate. And so he's going to tell us some of the changes that been coming about E-rate and things, good stories and hopefully not so good stories about E-rate. And so please help me welcome Mr. Gordon here.
Thank you. It worked with Dr. Amesto back in Laredo. I was the Chief Technology Officer for Laredo ISD. I was down to a little over 30 years in technology field and consultant for the past 9 years. And E-rate, and some of y'all know, it's a grant that the federal government provides to help in technology, which is basically infrastructure work. And there's been some changes and some things that unknown for the following year. And I'll start going through some of those, and anytime y'all have questions, just go ahead and stop me. A little bit of the overview of what's new. I'm talking a little bit about the bidding. You know, again, it's very important. Some of the forms that you have to do, the vendor selection, contracts, pre-commitment, and I'll just briefly touch on some of those because some of these things are changing. And again, we're going to hit, like I said, some unknowns for the following year, because this is the last year of the 5-year rule where you had a 5-year budget. The SLD, the School and Library, gave 5-year budget, which is this year's $150 per student per campus, and that's how they built to take the budget. You know, each year it moves a little bit based on the student attendance, based on how many kids we had. And the budget, that's what it was. You know, you had 100 kids, let's say approximately $158, that was your budget. But if you used it in 2015, you didn't have any budget left over. So that budget had to last you 5 years, which I think was very unfair to a lot of the districts in the category 2. And I'll go into some of that stuff that's coming up. Okay. What is changing? USAC. And USAC is a governing body, one of the governing bodies, Universal Service Fund, that does the training for overseas E-rate grant. Well, okay, these are some of the things that changed. They've improved their training. Supposedly, they've improved their training. You know, that's what they say. They've improved training. Over the last year, it's more in-person training now. They broke it up to different areas, different cities. Well, before they used to go all over the United States, now most of it is up north. We used to have those types of Houston. Dallas or all the Texas areas, but the last 2 years have been further up, so. They have a new PIA subcontract, the first change in 20 years. I think this is a bad move. Let me tell you, PIA is a program integrity assurance. When you submit an application, okay, someone has to review your application. And they have questions, they'll ask you questions, and then you go back and you respond. They're telling you this is ineligible, you have to prove that it's an eligible item. So they go and they review your application, and then they say, okay, fine, we'll accept it. Well, it's a new firm that's doing it after 20 years that does application review. So that tells us that the application process is going to be slower this year, the 2019 funding year, okay? No more funding adjustments after the fact. More funding adjustments after the fact. Okay, this is also something that's I think it's a red flag. Because before what would happen is, okay, during the PIA review, they would say, okay, this is not eligible, right off the bat, you know it's eligible, and you're going to pay out of pocket. Okay, so this is 90%, this is 85% funded by the federal government and 15% by the district. Some equipment is eligible, some parts are not, this, that, you go back and forth, and then they would rule, okay, out of the $100,000, you have to pay 15%, okay, everything is fine, no problem. Now what's happening is that they tell you the application's fine. You're going back and reviewing it again and saying, oh, have you spent the money? You know what, this was not eligible anymore. You have to pay back the federal government dollars. So that, I think, is going to cause problems because before you even started the project, you knew what was eligible and what was not eligible. So you knew what you had to spend or go back and ask for additional funds because normally you say, okay, I'm going to set aside the budget, I know the government's going to pay 5%, and I would always, go conservative, some things may not be eligible. So instead of, saying, I need 15%, I would say I need 18%. I would call it the fine to need 18%, just to have a 3% margin. But normally it ends up being 50%. But now, after you started the project, you're moving forward, you're going to say, oh, we decided to go back and review applications. And we found this, but it's already reviewed it. Well, no, you're still ineligible. So, now that 85% we gave you, got to give us that 85% for this. Maybe it's another $1,000 check to get back, or maybe $10,000 check to get back. So that I think is going to cause problems. Voice services are now completely phased out. Before you used to pay, it started at a 90-10%, like your cell phones, your POTS lines. Long distance, all those, your PRIs, all those were funded. You only paid 10%, and the government would pay you the 90%. Then they said, no, we're going to phase it out in 5 years. Then it went to, okay, it'll be 80-20. Then it went to 60-40. But now, this coming year, the 19, which is the E-rate 19, the year 19, now it's 100%. So that's another thing that you have to look at. You have to talk to your IT people for doing the budget to make sure that they allocate those funds because the cell phones, you have cell phones and you're using E-rate funds now, the district pays 100%. And your POTS lines pay 100% now, the district's going to have to pay 100%. Anything having to do with voice services, 100% now. Okay, this is the last year, like I said, of the 5-year budget, okay, 2019. Now, the new Category 2 system is going to come in 2020. Likely, we don't know what's going to happen. They're saying, it's going to stay the same. Possibly, but then they come back and they say, well, we really don't know what's going to happen in 2020. Are we going to go back to the way it used to be? Because it used to be 90. It used to be 90-10, and then they went to 85-15. And then you gave the 5-year budget. Before when it was 90-10, there was no budget. It was all 90-10, no budget. You could spend, what you need to spend this year, next year, you still have to do, same budget, new budget every year. It wasn't based on student attendance, student population. So we're charting unfamiliar waters for 2020. There's no rumors, there's nothing. So that kind of worries me. See what's going to happen with Category 2. In Category 2, what that does it pays for your infrastructure, like if you're having a new school and you have new network wiring. Okay. If they, right now, back then, before 5 years ago, it was, you only pay 10% and the government paid 90%. That's good. Or network equipment, the same thing, it was 10% 90. The past 5 years, it was 85% based on the budget, which didn't get you very far. You cannot, if a brand new campus, you cannot do a brand new campus with an 85-15 and then you have a budget based on the student population. It's not district, it's per campus, so whatever student population you had. But that's being phased out, so we don't know what's happening in 2020. We're hoping that it goes back to the 90-10 or even 85-15. We don't have a budget threshold or increase the dollar amount from 158 per student, maybe 175 or $200 per student, because it kind of hurts. What's happening is, you know, this grant was all about, you know, having technology, getting internet and doing all of this, you know. Bandwidth is very cheap, which is true. But the thing is, they're not funding what drives the bandwidth. You know, how can you get a, say, an example, okay, I want to put in a 10 gig pipe. You know, we're going there. But if they're not going to fund, now you're finished your budget, you have to change a lot of your equipment at the core. Then you have to change a lot of equipment at the campus. So, you know, you're falling behind. Some districts can't afford to go to a larger bandwidth because of changing, because of the budget that we have right now. So these are things that are changing. So was it really, I think we're going to have issues with whatever they had last year, it's going to be this year. Like a router is eligible, you know, switch is eligible, cable is eligible, your internet services is eligible, point-to-point is eligible. That should not change, and there's a few other categories. Okay, the Category 2 budget system for 2019, this is the last year of your budget. So basically the importance of that, knowing that is, if you have money, if in the IT, what I'm talking about is, whoever does your E-rate should know that there's money left in the budget calculations. It's not really dollars there, but it's dollars that you could apply for. Okay, if you don't apply for them this year, they're gone. Let's say you haven't done any projects in 5 years. And there's something that you might want to do for Category 2. This is the time to do it. If you need 2 or 3 switches, get them now. If you need to throw some cabling, do it now. It's important because we don't know what's going to happen in 2020. We don't know. And that money that you didn't use, you won't be able to use it. So that's why it's important as finance people talk to your IT staff or whoever's doing E-rate for you. Because that's money you're going to leave on the table that they haven't used that fund. And there's a portal that they can go to and it'll show them how much funding is still available per campus. It's by per campus. Now I'm going to go to competitive bidding. Okay, again, these are, you know, I've discussed several times, I just need to reinforce because this is where people, you know, a lot of this get into problems. You know, you must ensure the process is fair and open, avoid conflicts of interest, open competitive bidding evaluation, you know, read the form 470 RFP response and contract fine print. Okay, basically the form 470 is like an RFP. Okay, a form 470 is created by your person that does E-rate, and that tells the federal government and all the vendors, because it's uploaded to a portal where all vendors that are part of the E-rate system can bid on your project. Okay, and there's one question when you do the form 470, is there a bid? So that bid you upload it so all the vendors can see it. Okay, so it's important that you go hand in hand because if you say no on the form 470, it's not a bid, and your district requires a bid, and you have a bid, your application is going to get denied. One little box there that says you have a bid or an RFP, you put yes. If you don't, and you have an RFP, then you're in violation because you're saying that there's no bid, so anyone's going to bid anything. Because in the form 470, you give a description of what you're asking for. The RFP, it's where the detail comes in. So you have to have those two hand in hand and not get rejected. Okay, Form 470 indicates the services and categories of services for which each entity are asked. You know, there's going to be internet access, you want internet, you want point-to-point, you want switching, you want cabling, you want network equipment, so that's what you do there. Okay, and it must be posted for 28 days. Okay. You usually post it on your website, the RFP, the Form 470 is out there. You still have to follow whatever purchasing guidelines you have. But you cannot sign a contract before the 28th day. If you decide, well, you know, I'm just going to keep it 2 weeks, you did that, you say your purchasing guidelines say 2 weeks, then you can award. Well, in this case, you can't. You have to follow that, but you don't award it. It has to be, before you make a decision or sign a contract, it has to be 28 days out there for vendors to see it. So that's important. A lot of people say, well, you know, we'll just go with what the districts. Some districts have just 2 weeks out there and then they'll award it. Well, if a contract is signed before the 28th day, because you have to upload the contract, once you say, hey, I'm going to go with this vendor. If they see that it was, because the Form 470, once you post it, it says this is the allowable contract date. So anytime, say, I just submitted one for a district that I'm working for, the allowable contract date is December 12th. And I have, we're opening the bids on the 14th. I always look a couple of extra days, so the bids will be opened on the 14th. So we met the allowable contract date. So once we open the bids, we decide who it goes for, we go, of course, go to the board for approval, then the contract is going to be signed. It's after the 28th day, so we're within comply. Okay, then, you know, the Form 470 also indicates any special requirements or disqualification factors. One of the things that, sometimes you put, you know, you need a walkthrough, you want the vendors to go see. If you're going to bid network equipment, you're going to bid cabling on the new campus, you want the vendors to do a walkthrough so they can fairly bid what you're asking for. Okay. If you say that the vendors will, if vendors do not show up, it's a thing for disqualification. How can a vendor bid something that they haven't seen? Okay. But if you don't put that in your RFP, and you say, no, I'm going to disqualify you because you didn't show up, where is it? You're in violation. The vendor has every right to file a grievance or a complaint. You have to be careful of that. You have to, on your RFP, you have to put what's disqualifying factors. Indicate schools will be receiving the services. The Form 470 has to indicate, you know, if it's the campus, if it's the core, which is the non-core, what campuses are receiving the services, which is the school district. Posting of a new Form 470 is not required if a previous year Form 470 is a multi-year contract. What that means is, let's say we're going out on bids for internet access this year, and you want a 3-year contract. Again, there's a little box there that says you're going for a multi-year contract. So again, if you don't put that in there and you sign a 3-year contract, you're only going to be eligible for 1 year, and E-rate's not going to pay the other 2 years. This will have to pay 100%. Yeah, that's very important, a multi-year contract. And if you have a multi-year contract, you don't need to do Form 470 on the 2nd year. Because there's another form, the Form 471, you just refer to the contract number and you're fine. So you don't have to do Form 470 for that. Okay. Request for proposals, even if you have an RFP, you must describe the services designed in the Form 470. You just can't put a blank Form 470. You have to describe the services. There's not a lot of room for us to be very specific on the Form 470, but you have to say, I want internet, I want a 5 gig pipe for this campus for internet services. And then whatever specifications you might have on the RFP, you get a little more descriptive because you're going to say, hey, there's an RFP out for the details, so please do the RFP. Okay. Okay, not required under FCC rules, but must comply with local and federal rules. Okay. An RFP is not required. You put all the information to the Form 470, but normally the districts do require an RFP. So that's like, I mean, you have to say you have an RFP. Describe your project, scope, location, other requirements in detail. You must be available to bidders at least 28 calendar days. It's, including weekends, includes holidays, so it's 20 calendar days, not work days. That's the key. A lot of sometimes the misconception is, oh, it's work days. So they leave the bid out a lot more, but it's actually calendar days. Okay. Sufficient detail in Form 470 cannot provide generic description like, I want to switch. Okay. You want to switch. Well, there's a whole variety of switches. There's a 24-port switch. You want a PoE, non-PoEs, 48-port switch, and there's about 100 different types of switches you can get. So a vendor's going to bid the cheapest because you didn't tell him what kind of switch you wanted. So if he's the lowest, how can you go with somebody else? He said, hey, you asked for a switch and that's it. I'm providing this switch. You didn't tell me what you want. So you're going to get into problems if you go with someone that's more costly. So it cannot be a generic. You may say, I want, our district standards is Cisco. I want to switch a 48-port PoE switch that is compatible to Cisco switching. Okay, that's descriptive right there. Now they know what to bid on either Cisco or something that's compatible. But you have to tell the vendor, because if you want to stay with Cisco, you have to say the district standard is Cisco, but we'll entertain other vendors' the products as long as it's equivalent or better to the Cisco switch. Cannot provide the Form 70, you cannot provide a laundry list of products and services. You can't put, I want the switch with all the different components. You can't do that. There's no room for it. That's because the RP comes in. Applicants must choose the most cost-effective solution on their Form 470 with price the primary factor. What that means is, in your RFP, you have to create a table. And you're going to say, okay, price is primary, let's say 30 points, or let's say 40 points. Then you have, let's say, local engineers, it's 20. And whatever else is 100 points, but price has to be the #1 factor. And you can't say price is 20% and local engineers is 50%. You can't. The highest factor has to be price. Other factors we consider price would be weigh the most heavily. Have evaluation process should be carefully documented, and the documentation must be maintained. You have to keep documentation for 10 years. So you usually have to try. I'd say get a committee, at least 3 or 4 people in the committee, and you don't want all IT people. You may want to say the principal of the campus, or maybe the CFO, or business manager, the IT person, someone from purchasing. So purchasing, make sure you did all the purchasing guidelines. The IT, of course, the finance and money people, and the IT person, the one who wrote the RFP and did all that, so they can explain what they're looking for. So, and then you have your evaluation form, and you have all 3 signatures, and that's your documentation to get on it. Correspondence, emails, memos, bid evaluation. One of the things you want to put on there is that all correspondence, all questions must be via email. Because if you answer a question verbally, he may understand something different. But if it's a question, everyone needs to know what the answer is. Okay, because you can't add something extra or give someone an impression. Well, So what you do is you send the response to all the vendors. If I would have a question, you don't have to say which vendor. There's a question, this, and this, and you respond. You send out the response to all the vendors. That way it's an even playing field, and each vendor knows what the response was. Okay. Price of eligible goods and services will be a primary factor in the evaluation. Vendor evaluation begins after 20. I always put the 28-day waiting period again because that's very important. You have to wait till after 20 before you start the evaluation process and sign the contract. Most cost effective, select the winning bidder, must be primary factor solution. Other factors including pricing can be considered as well, but not weighed equally or higher than cost. Free services. Can't use E-rate to get free things, ineligible or eligible. Cost of goods and services cannot be inflated to cover the free ineligible items. And this would go back to past history of what's happened. Okay, some pieces of equipment may be ineligible. Okay, like let's say on a router, you can't put a lot of your security modules on there. you know, for, there's different things you can put on there. All those security modules are ineligible. The router itself is eligible, so let's say the router is, let's say $50,000. The other modules may come out to about maybe $35,000. Okay? So now you're saying, okay, so you're going to pay $35,000 is 100% district cost. The $50,000 is 90% to the government and 10% to the district. Well, in the past, what was happening is the vendor would have some agreement over here with the district and say, okay, this router, it costs $100,000. That's the eligible portion to supplement the cost. And that's Hcde. A lot of purchasing people and a lot of IT people took some long vacations in federal institutions. A contract must be signed and dated by the applicant prior to the 4471 certification postmark. Because once you select a vendor, you have to go ahead and submit a Form 471, which tells the government this is a vendor, XYZ vendor is the one who got the RFP, this is the cost, blah, blah, blah. And in order to do that, you have to upload the contracts when you upload the Form 470. So two things are going to happen. The vendor the contract has to be signed by the vendor, and the district authorized person has to sign the contract. You cannot have only one signature. Both of them have to be on there. And both of them, except, okay, the contract by the vendor can be before the 28th day. That's okay, because you say, hey, you know, this is the cost, I'm providing it, that's okay, and it can be signed before, because a lot of times it's hard to get a hold of the vendor, your last minute, so you usually ask the vendor just to make sure that they sign the contract ahead of time. The district staff cannot sign the contract before the 28th day. It's like a superintendent or the board president, whoever has to be signed after the 28th day. Voluntary extensions. This comes in handy because sometimes you want to be able to extend an RFP, and then you put the language in the RFP. Let's say you went on a 3-year contract, okay, for internet services. And on the 4th year, there's no price change. And you don't want to go out on bids because there's going to be something drastic or something new that's going to come out in year 5. Okay, it's going to be something, totally something different. Beginning service date and then service date, you put September 30th. You have to have service date. Anything above that, you have to formally do what we call Form 500 and request a formal extension. Applicants may request services extensions from USAC for non-reoccurring services. There's a Form 500. A certification Form 470, applicants certify and have secured access to necessary resources, have complied with all FCC state and local competitive bidding process. Non-discount portion of the cost for eligible services will not be paid by the service provider. Because the past, I'd say, you know what, we'll go ahead and we'll pay that. Don't worry about it. Just give us the business and we'll pay the not eligible and stuff like that. That cannot be. No kickback. Failure to comply with the program rules could result in civil or criminal prosecution. Persons who have been convicted of crime violations are held civilly liable for certain acts arising from their participation in the program and such suspension and debarment of the program. There's been a couple of districts that were debarred for about 5 or 6 years. And a lot of people went to jail. From an owner of one of the companies to the chief technology officer, to the director of purchasing, to the director of finance. And it was a huge application. And they ended up having to, the district had to return all the funds, which was quite a few, like about $50, $60 million. That's what they were awarded. And several districts, have that happened to. It's gotten a lot more stringent now, so there's a lot less of that happening. I'm saying it doesn't happen, but a lot less. But here in Texas, there's about 3 districts that a lot of some people went to the federal prison for some time. I know there was an incident where this one company got to get a whole bunch of smaller school districts who was doing work for, and they had a little Christmas party for them. And of course, it's hunting season. Every person, they're gonna give door prizes, right? So everyone got a .270 hunting rifle with a scope. Yeah. Well, they ended up getting caught, but that vendor got caught in it. So how can you be, well, say what door prizes so? You're giving 20 door prizes to 20 people and it's all the same, so everyone's gonna get the same door prize. So, and also I think they also caught one purchasing person from a district where the vendor bought him one of those, what do you call them? Put money in one of those cards. And had heard rumors, or they were investigating this one company. And they saw some large expenditures or something, and they followed through, and this person used that card somewhere else, and they ended up tracking it to the person who bought the card from the company. So both of them did some time as well. So they have ways of catching you, so don't do it. There's only two ways to do it, the right way and the right way, that's it. Document retention time for 10 years, last of service. It could be for year funding 19, it's until 2030. Any documents from a prior year that supports current year services must be kept at least 10 years. Documents may be retained in electronic format or paper, or must maintain documentation for prior years if it supports current year funding. Let's say you did ask for an extension, and you're having to do some stuff. So even though it was, let's say, I think they're not making it more efficient. And now that they hired a new company, I think there's going to be headaches. They're going to do the PIA, it's going to take longer to get funded. Maximize cost efficient spending of E-rate. Well, they've done that, you know, they really run you through the ringer. You have to really do everything the right way, and now they've limited how much you can spend with a 5-year budget, but still, I think there's a problem there. For number one is ensuring affordable access to high-speed broadband. Okay. Well, they're funding at 90%. They're funding your internet access, which is great. But after a certain limit, the equipment can't hold. If you want to go to a 10 gig pipe, you want to go to a higher. Right now, a 1 gig pipe, let's say right now it costs you like, after the 90/10, you're paying like about $300 a month, the district, for 1 gigabyte of internet access. For the large district, that's enough. You can't do much with that. The 5 gig pipe, you have to buy some other equipment. When you go to 10 gig pipe, that equipment support the 10 gig pipe is going to run you $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. But how can you go to a high-speed pipe if you spent your budget, you spent your budget the first year doing some other things that you needed to do to upgrade some of your technology. You have no budget, so you can't go higher. So that kind of, I think, went by the wayside, that goal. Because with that 5-year budget it started at $150 per student. In 5 years, you only gained $8 per student. That's not much. Okay, funding year snapshot. Form 470 submitted now. Time to start doing that. No filing dates have been set yet by USAC. Estimated date January to March. So that's going to say do the Form 470. Because what they do is once you do the Form 470, you get your vendor, you have to do the Form 471 to tell the federal government we selected the vendor. All the contracts are signed. Well, there's a deadline to do that. Last year, I think it was March 22nd or 26th. Okay. But this year they haven't told us when's the deadline. And now they said it could be from January to March. So if you haven't done Form 470s and stuff, and you're waiting till December, you may be too late in January. You may not meet the deadline. So that's something you have to be very careful with because they haven't announced it yet. The belief is it's going to be in March, like it's been the last 3 years. 1 year was in May, 1 year was in February, but the last 2 years have been in March. So we're hoping that it's going to stay in March, but nothing guarantees. So whoever does your E-rate, they need to start doing it now. Eligible list is still pending. Every year, it doesn't make sense. They open the window to do the Form 470, but they didn't tell you what's eligible, what's been approved to be eligible. Even though the rumor is there's not going to be any change. But they're kind of working backwards. You're going to apply for something that they may say it's ineligible. That doesn't work very well. More appeals on and invoicing related challenges. Okay. Leave extra margin of error and triple check status of forms. Again, it's because if they're going to tell you you have to get money back, well, you can appeal it. There's an appeal process. But your application frozen. They're going to tell you you can't spend anything until we decide yes or no. Even though you've already spent it, they're not going to let you do your next application. So there's a lot of challenges. You're going to see more appeals based on the new PIA reviewers. I think it's going to be, and then based on them going back and looking at previous at your previous approval. Okay, bottom line, plan for bureaucratic hiccups. That's going to happen because of the new PIA reviewers, the new company. They got to get, hire people. Not necessarily they're hiring the same people from the old company. That hasn't, we asked about that, and they said, well, we don't know. We don't think so. The change in the PIA subcontractor and ongoing EPIC challenges. EPIC is the online portion of E-rate where it's a portal, and they're constantly making changes, and sometimes when they make changes, it's not the best thing. My belief is they didn't even test the change. We're the ones, finding out what's wrong with them, they didn't even know. Use remaining, see your category 2 budgets in funding year 19. Look at all sites that have a balance and need upgrades. Consider planning window extending to September 2020, because E-rate year runs July 1 to June 30. So 2019 is going to be July. It's going to be, what we're doing for is for July 1st, 2019, and you're going to, instead of saying instead of saying June 30th of 2020, you're going to say you're going to say September 30th of 2020. You get that extra 2 months, which you will not be able to use it in when you do the 2020 application. So again, it's important that you buy what you need to buy now this year's funding. We're hoping that they go back in 2020 the way it was originally. We had an 90-10 and no budget. Every year was a new budget, so whatever you need to spend, you need to spend. Or if they're going to go back to a 5-year budget, increase the budget. Because with $150 per student, you cannot even do half the campus. You have to do a wiring for half the campus or redo all the network equipment. You cannot do a campus with what the current budget is. Hopefully they'll do something to make that happen. And basically that's it. If there's any questions, I'm here. And not, make sure you talk to your E-rate people, whoever's doing E-rate, and then they need to the campus budget for them to do it this year. So money's gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. A little story about E-rate, that Roy and I always yeah, you forgot to mention that. When I do my numbers, I do my numbers by the Roman numeral letters. So when I was signing the letter, I wrote, I think it was a 1, and they thought it was a 2. So we have to appeal it and tell them that's how I write the 1. And so they sent me writing samples. And finally, about 6 months later, they did approve it. So
They thought we had signed it.
yeah, that they were late. Here's the QR code. Once you get it, you'll be able to do the survey and then print your certificates. You need CPA certificates or you need ASBO certificates. You can both print them there. If for some reason you get trouble and you won't get them or something happens, send me an email and they will contact you to follow up. We will meet again on December the 7th we'll have another hot meal like this. Just thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez and Hcde, and it was a wonderful presentation and time. We appreciate Jack as well. Thank you, and we'll see you guys. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Did you copy the presentation or? Oh, it's on the, right.
Let me know if you have any, issues with the.
We're gonna get together.
Okay.